So we are going to cover the remaining of the purchase contract in here. In this section, it specifies who pays for what fees. I see a lot of time offers are coming in and all of those check marks or these boxes are blank. It will create confusion. It will create situations. So make sure that you check mark whatever box there is. Like in here, if you don't say buyer or seller and leave it blank, you will get a call from escrows asking, so who is paying for the retrofit? Who is paying for 9A report if the property is in Los Angeles? And at that point, oh, who is paying for it? Nothing has been check marked in here. You either wrote the offer this way or as a listing agent, you received an offer where these two were blank. So what is the option at that point? If you go back to the buyer's agent, they may say, oh, I don't know. And the seller will say, well, I don't have to pay. It's not check marked there. So make sure that every box is check marked, either buyer or seller, okay? Buyer and seller shall each pay their own respective fees. Make sure this line is specified, seller's choice, or whose escrow we are going to go with. Same thing in here. If it's a single family resident or a condo, it doesn't matter. In California, we still have to pay county transfer tax and seller pays for it, okay, customary. Now, is it written on stone? No, because an investor may come in and write an offer to you and say, buyer will pay seller's county transfer tax. Or if it's in Los Angeles where there is city tax, ordinarily seller will pay for it, but an investor may come in and say, buyer will pay city transfer tax, the seller's city transfer tax. So we don't care who is going to pay for it as long as it's specified. If investor says the buyer will pay for it, then he will have to check mark the buyer, and seller, it will be like this, okay? So if you are writing the offer and it's an investment property and you want your offer be stronger, you can always check with your escrow company, find out how much will be the county transfer tax, how much will be city transfer tax. And if you want the buyer pay for it, you just put the buyer. And what it will do is it will, instead of going up in your purchase contract, you're giving incentive to the seller where the net to them will be higher because they don't have to pay county transfer tax or city transfer tax. So those are all negotiation items. If it's a condominium, of course, you have a homeowners association fee. So again, if it's an investor and wants to say the buyer will pay for it, check mark. We don't care. We just want to know who is paying for it, so the escrow will not be confused and it will not be a negotiation item down the road. Okay. So if it's an HOA involved, you complete all of those things, all these forms in here. Some seller shall pay for any private transfer fee or buyer. What this is some of the new developments, they may have private transfer fee. We are not going to go into what that is, but in their CCNRs, they have private transfer fee. So if you are writing an offer on a brand new development, you make sure that you ask the builder and you look at the CCNRs to see if there is a private transfer fee. Because if there is, then you need to know who is paying. Is the builder paying for it or the buyer paying for it, okay? And you can educate yourself on what private transfer fee is by going to Google or go to a development and find out what it is. Here is buyer and seller shall pay for whatever else that needs to be paid for, you will write in here. Again, buyer and seller shall pay for the cost of home warranty. So make sure that who pays for it? Is it the seller or is it the buyer? Not to exceed a certain amount. Call your home warranty rep, ask them if you have selling a house where there's a pool and air conditioning, how much will be the policy for that? Is it basic? Is it enhanced? Whatever it is, you will put in here. Let's say she says it or he says it's $700. Do you want upgraded or do you want the standard? So educate yourself on home warranty, and whoever is going to pay, put it in here. If the buyer says, oh, forget it, I don't want any home warranty, then you just put buyer waives the purchase of home warranty, okay? Items included and excluded from the sale. Item listed in the MLS flyers or marketing materials are not included in the purchase price or excluded from the sale. So sometime in the MLS, if you will see the listing agent will say the light fixture in the dining room is not included in the purchase price, because we know that everything which is attached to the walls is included in the purchase price. So if you are representing a seller and there are custom drapery there, or there is a custom chandelier that the seller wants to move, I have two recommendations. One is either ask the seller to remove that chandelier, because you really don't want the buyer to see something and fall in love with it only to find out that it's not going to be included in the price. So it's easier that way. But if it's not, then you make sure you look at the MLS, and as a secondary way, transfer disclosure to see if anything is excluded from the purchase, okay? And you would say any existing electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing, it just gates and power are included in the purchase price, okay? So here, again, if the seller wants to take the stove because it's something which she paid or he paid $9,000, $10,000 and they want to take it, fine, as long as it's stated in MLS, it can take. If the buyer really wants that stove, then you put it in here if you are representing the buyer. If the buyer wants the refrigerator, you put it in there. So make sure you do not leave lines blank. Make sure everything is covered, okay? List or liened items in the system. What are those things? Those are something like the solar system that they have on the property. As a seller, they have to make sure that it is disclosed to the buyer that those are leased items. And especially with the solar panels, if they're leased, then you will have to talk to that leasing company, to that company. Usually they have applications that the buyers have to submit, and the lender will look at this number, this lease amount. Let's say it's, I don't know, $250 a month. That is going to go against their debt to income ratio. So you need to make sure that from day to during your physical inspection, you are talking to the leasing company, getting all the information on that, okay? And providing it to your seller and letting your buyer know. It's part of your due diligence. Again, items excluded from the sale. Whatever it is, if it's attached, just write it in here. Closing and possession, buyer intends. If it's owner occupied, buyer intends. If it's an investor, then you will check buyer does not intend to occupy the property. Seller occupying, this part is talking about what time, what day the possession will be given to the seller. So if it's a vacant property, I'm assuming that the possession shall be delivered to buyer at 6 p.m. on the date of close of escrow. Or let's say if it's an owner occupied property, and they will close escrow tomorrow, but they need 2 days to move out, then you will say no later than 2 days after close of escrow at 6 p.m.
Yeah.
Or you will say 6 p.m. on, you will not write this, you will clear this, or you will say 6 p.m. on Saturday the 2nd. You either can put a date or you can put number of days in here. All right. So seller remaining in possession after close of escrow. If seller has the right to remain in possession after close of escrow, then you are advised to use the SIP form, seller in possession. There are two forms for this. One is if the seller is staying there for less than 29 days, and there is one which is for more than 29 days. So let's say the buyer says, oh, okay, Mr. Seller, we are closing escrow tomorrow and you can stay there 2 more days, but there's no cost to it. It's $0. The SIP form, you will have to complete that. So please go to the CAR forms, look at the SIP form, the two of them, and get familiar with these forms, okay? The other one is RLAS. This is where the seller is going to stay in position for more than 30 days. So there are two forms, SIP and RLAS, okay? Please get familiar with these two forms. If there's a tenant in the property, if you have bought a property which is tenant occupied, and it's an investor who bought it and they have come to an agreement that tenant can stay there, then you will put check mark in here and you will use form TIP and you will attach it to your offer, or at some point during escrow or before close of escrow, you'll make sure that this form is completed, okay? The SIP, RLAS, and TIP do not have to be completed with your purchase contract. However, they have to be completed prior to close of escrow, okay? This section is talking about statutory disclosures, including lead-based paint, hazard disclosure, and cancellation rights.
Question.
Yes.
If you're
Can we keep all the questions to the end?
okay.
Just write it down so you won't forget. I just want to go through this for the recording purposes. Okay, so we all know that as a buyer, you have the right to review all the disclosures and decide whether you want to move forward with the property or not. So in paragraph 14A, which is usually 7 days or 5 days, seller has to give you all the disclosures, including the lead-based disclosure, the what you call it, the TDS, the SIP, seller property questionnaire, and there's a whole list of disclosures and reports that are mandatory to be delivered to the buyer. So why is it important that if you are the buyer's agent, or if you are the, first of all, if you are the listing agent, make a habit that as soon as you get a listing, you tell your sellers that in the next 48 hours or 72 hours, you will receive either through you or your transaction coordinator, a whole bunch of disclosures that you will have to complete. And please make sure that these reports and these disclosures are completed fully, because it is very, very important. Once you have these reports ready in your file, let's say you open escrow, you get an offer accepted. You have 5 or 7 days, I believe it is, to provide these disclosures to the buyers. And the buyers have the right to review them, and within 5 days to either cancel the escrow or approve them. Let's say in the TDS, there's something about the neighbor's dog barking, and or they're having parties in their house and they've called the police or whatever. It's seller's duty to disclose whatever issue they had, and it's buyer's right to say whether they want to move forward with it or not. So the importance is, one, when you're doing your physical inspection, as a rule of thumb for me, and you all know in my group, that we want to have the TDS and SPQ when?
Before inspection.
Before inspection. Why?
So that if there's anything to look into, if there's anything that calls your attention, then the inspector will be able to look at it.
Correct.
Right.
Also, you can use the inspection to get out of the deal.
No, we're talking about the importance of the reports. So it's important in that sense also, because the buyers have 5 days to get out of the transaction because of these disclosures and reports. You don't want to give this to them 10 days or 5 days before close of escrow. You want to make sure that they have these reports and disclosures in the beginning of the escrow, okay? So if you're representing the buyer, we know that our TC that at least I work with, immediately as soon as escrow is open, she sends out a list of all the disclosures which is required, and she tells the listing agent that we need to have those immediately or within the next 5 days, whatever is stated in the purchase contract. So be very aware and be very familiar with these disclosure laws and what these disclosures are all about. We can't go through each one of them here, but this is why it's so important that you guys get into the forms in CAR and truly get familiar with those things. And if you are representing the seller, explain to them, like on transfer disclosure, there are all these boxes that have to be check marked. If they miss one, that's an invalid TDS, it's incomplete TDS. And then it will have to go back to the seller to be completed and be delivered to the buyer. And guess what? The 5 days starts from delivery at that time. So as agent and your TC, we are responsible and accountable to make sure that these transfer disclosures are all completed. Our agent visual inspection, our AVID, needs to be attached to the transfer disclosure because it's part of those things that again, I believe the buyer has the right. So in the remaining of these pages, it talks about natural environmental hazard, withholding taxes, all of those things, okay? I have clients that with Megan Law, I probably had few people who've done it, very few, but they read this, then they went into the public page or the website, and they find out that 3 houses down from what they were buying, there was a sex offender living there. And they have a 2-year-old kid, and they decided, we don't want to buy this house. And they have every right to feel, scared or whatever, nervous. But this is the importance of why we need to give the times is of essence when it comes to these disclosures. Let me see. If it's an HOA involved, in here it says, if the property is a condominium or is located in a planned development, seller has 3 days after acceptance to request from the HOA copies of any documents required by law, disclosures, and pending or anticipated lawsuits. If I was the buyer's agent, I would call the escrow and say, like 3 days after we open the escrow, have you ordered the HOA docs? Because if you want to know if there's any special assessment or whatever, so make sure you make that phone call in your checklist, make that checklist that you call the HOA to make sure the HOA request has been sent out. All right. And take a step further. Hold on to your thought for now. Take a step further. You have the phone number of the HOA. Call the HOA yourself as buyer's agent. Find out if there are any upcoming special assessment that you need to be aware of. Find out if there is any lawsuit or litigation on the property, because if there is, then you need to let your lender know what it is and to see if you can get a loan on this property. Because if there is a litigation, depending on what it is, your lender probably will not be able to give you a loan on this. Okay, so hold on to your thought on this and I'll answer it I'll just finish these 2 pages and we're done. But condition of the property, you know how we always write in our purchase contract, the property sold as is, whatever? Well, it's already here. You don't need to put it in your purchase contract. So it says it's sold as is in present physical condition as the date of acceptance and subject to buyer's investigation right. So just because a buyer is buying a property or seller is saying that, oh, I'm selling my property as is, it doesn't mean that a buyer has to accept it. All it's saying that, hey, Mr. Buyer, you have the right to do your inspection, bring in your contractors, inspectors, whatever, check with the city on all aspects of this property. But if there is any damage or anything, you're going to come back and ask for credit or repair. I'm not going to do it. That's all it means. And you as buyer's agent, we know that right now there's a lot of offers coming in saying that no physical inspection. I think that sooner than later, these are going to come back and hunt the agents, because the buyer will come back and say, well, you didn't explain to me what is the significance of me signing this physical inspection waiver. And now I found this in the foundation, and guess who the lawsuit parties will be? You as the buyer's agent, seller, your broker, list everybody. So explain this to your buyers very clearly, the consequences of not doing a physical inspection. And if they say, hey, listen, we understand, we are all okay with that, then say, okay, here is the waiver of physical inspection and the fact that we recommended you to do the inspection as your broker and you decided to go against it. I mean, Armand can vouch for that, what happened on that. So be very clear when you're explaining things to your buyer, have the forms, proper forms signed. And even if you have to go one step further, like I always say, confirm your conversations with your buyers and seller via email. Meaning you had this conversation with your buyer about physical inspection, you had them sign the waiver, and way in the beginning, you tell the buyer and seller, Mr. Buyer, Mr. Seller, we are going to go ahead and have a lot of conversations about this purchase. In order for us to make sure that we are all on the same page, as soon as a conversation is done, I will follow it up with an email confirmation of our conversation. So if I assumed something wrong, that will be your opportunity to correct it. Okay? I think this is something an attorney told me, and I think it's such a fabulous way of protecting yourself, because in conversations, sometimes words can be misunderstood. But if you are putting it in writing and the buyer says, no, I didn't say that, this is the time. And if God forbid you get into a lawsuit or something, then at least you have a whole records of your conversations. And it's not like he said, she said situation. So if this is one thing you can get into the habit of doing it, it's no disrespect to anybody. It's just a good business sense to me. It's my personal opinion. I can't say you have to do it, but I think it's a good recommendation for you. Buyer investigation and matters affecting the property. Again, buyer's acceptance of the condition and any matter affecting the property is a contingency of disagreement as specified in this paragraph. So buyer has the right of inspection for termite, any inspection on the property, but like septic tank is part of it, termite is part of it, chimney is part of it, sewer is part of it, the structure, foundation, everything. Go to the city, tell the buyer if they want to check something with the city, go check, but to check with them. If they want to build an ADU, they need to go to the city, give them the address and say, listen, we want to build an ADU at this property. Can we do it or can we not do it? We are thinking of buying this property. It's a hillside, and our plan is to add a second story to that. Can we do it or can we not do it? So you don't go on behalf of your buyers. Buyers are the ones who are buying it. Let them go and hear it from the horse's mouth themselves. Do not be do not deliver a message from planning department to your buyer. If they are buying the house, in my opinion, they should do it. However, please, please, please tell your buyers if there is, and let's say you have a house which says this room may be unpermitted. They cannot, I'm specifying, they cannot go to the city and say, oh, we are thinking of buying this property, and then there's this room that seller says is unpermitted. Can we check on that? No, you cannot, because that property does not belong to you yet, and you cannot put the seller in that situation where the county or city's planning, inspector is gonna go to the house and have them demolish that room. We cannot say the same thing that I see in MLS sometimes. They said, oh, there is a structure that may not be permitted. Well, imagine if an inspector is looking to buy a house and then they see this in MLS. And then they go to the house. I said, hey, knock, knock, Mr. Seller. I hear that you have a guest house over there which is unpermitted. No, take it down, tear it down. Be very careful what we are writing and what we are saying to people. So those are conversations which are extremely important to have with your buyers, and for you to know what to put in MLS and what not to put in MLS. Some of these things are legal. So again, feel free, please, I recommend it, to talk to your brokers, to ask them if this is the right way of handling it or not. All I'm teaching is the way that I am doing my contracts and my business, okay? What the title and vesting. Well, again, within the title time specified in paragraph 14, buyer shall be provided with the current preliminary title report. And this is only an offer by the title insurer to issue a policy of title insurance. And in there, you will see if they're late on making their tax payments. Are they delinquent on the tax payment? Is there any mechanical lien on the property? You're basically looking for that. Any easements? This is what taxes, titles are. Very important in here, taking title on the property. There are joint tenancy, there are community property, there is quit claim. So please do not advise your buyers to say, well, I see a lot of couples taking title as joint tenants. Well, they are, but maybe they have already spoken to their CPA or their attorney, and they are doing it based on his or her advice. We don't know the situation with them. So always tell them, please talk to your CPA, or if you have an attorney, talk to them and see based on your situation, what is the best way of taking title to the property. If you're single, that's fine. If you're husband and wife, couple, partners, whatever, find out what are pros and cons of taking title in different ways, okay? Do not give advice on that. So let me see what time it is. It's 10:09 and we are on page, let me quickly go over this as well and we will be done. So here is where it says seller has 7 days after acceptance to deliver to buyer all reports, disclosure, and information for which seller is responsible under paragraph 567. This is where maximum template says 7 days. So if you're on the 5th day and you haven't received those disclosures, what do? You call the listing agent and say, hey, the contract says 7 days or 5 days. Where are my disclosures? We don't want the buyer to receive them on day 15. A lot of, unfortunately, I see a lot of agents do not have these forms ready by their sellers at the time that they are signing the listing agreement. So for you guys, I want you to be the professionals. Make a habit. If you're taking a listing, immediately have these forms completed for your own sake. And then here, buyer has 17 days after acceptance to do it. So we already know that here in this market, you cannot have 17 days for inspection. On any of my listings, nobody will have 17 days. 5-7 days is the maximum that in my book is allowed for this. Unless they do an inspection on the 5th day and then they find out that there is an issue that they have to bring a more professional person, a specialist, then you will do an extension. Okay, be very careful. If you're writing an investment, buying an investment property for your investor, and you are saying escrow to close in 20 days, but yet you have left this at 17 days, it just will show that you really are not detailed oriented person and you're not paying attention to details.
Mhm.
All right. I'm gonna stop in here. And if there are any questions, let's answer it. And then I will also stop recording. Questions?
Yes, go ahead, Arm.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So my question was going back with inspections for an HOA. So if they're buying a condo, the inspector inspects the unit, but what about, I mean, so I was trying to read, they don't inspect common grounds. They don't
No.
inspect, they only inspect the unit. They don't get to, you know, what if there's a potential of a clog, you know, from the upstairs unit?
Well, if they do their inspection, they just want to make sure that there is nothing in their unit. Because if there's something coming from the unit upstairs, it's the HOA responsibility. So it's not your buyer's responsibility. With condo, there is a restricted amount of inspection you can do.
Got it. So it's only limited to the inside of the unit.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
Arman, you had a question.
Yeah, when we were talking about the having possession of the property after closing the escrow, shouldn't the seller's agent fill out that form?
It doesn't matter. If they don't do it, you do it, because you've already come to an agreement on the cost per day, whether there, if it's 15 days and you come to an agreement that 15 days is going to cost $100 per day, you already have an agreement by the time this form is being completed.
Mm.
So whoever writes it, writes it.
And my second question is about unpermitted room. So to which point you disclose that information? If you're seller's agent, I don't know, and if you're buyer's agent, how do you find out all the rooms are permitted? I don't know.
You can go to the city and get a drawing of the property, a copy of the permit, and you will compare the square footage on the permit, number of rooms on the permit to the actual what you're seeing. You will see a drawing of the property. So you will see how many rooms were there. If they have added a room to the original drawings, then there must be a permit for that addition. So if you pull all the permits, you should see it. Another thing on the permits, you tell the seller, the buyer, to go and pull all the permits. There are companies who will pull all the permits. But it's important to explain to the buyer, you're doing this just for information only, and you are not taking any liability for that. There's a form that you would need to give to your buyers to sign, because you don't want the buyer to come back and say, well, you are the one who gave me those permits and we are missing something. Understand, as agents, we have certain liabilities and certain responsibilities. If you're going to overextend the responsibilities, make sure you protect yourself by having the buyer sign acknowledgements, proper acknowledgements. Those are very important, okay? I'm gonna stop recording.